So we're in week 3 of this invitational life, and this week we are looking at the whole subject of what does it look like when we show up into people's lives. I want to tell you 2 really quick stories. If I'm honest, these stories don't put me in the best of light, but since we launched this series there have been 2 things that have happened to me. In fact, the very Sunday that I spoke, the week 1 on this series, Danielle and I, we were catching a train into London, and it was our wedding anniversary. We were going to see a show, and we were catching the last train home that night. And we were we were pretty tired, and we were looking for a seat that we could kind of put our head down and get some sleep as we were catching the 50-minute journey home. Anyway, this girl comes and she decides to sit right next to us. And she kind of doesn't sit there quietly. She starts talking to us. I mean, like, who does that on a train, right? But that's what she does. And she starts very quickly. She gets into some very deep and personal questions about Danielle and I. She wants to know when we met, how long we've been together, how many kids we have. She wants to know everything that is everything about us. The story kind of grows and it develops over a little bit of time. And if I'm really honest with you, I'm feeling super uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable that she's asking me these questions. It's on a train. Everybody else can hear what's happening around us. And I'm just feeling pretty uncomfortable. Anyway, then she asks the question, what do you do for a job? That's like a dreaded question in some ways for me, because it means that I have to go into a level of conversation that I'm not always, just being honest, that I'm not always comfortable having. Anyway, the conversation grows again and we begin talking about her faith. Her faith doesn't look like anything like mine, but she has faith. And she begins to talk a little bit about what that means to her. We're able to then tell her a little bit more about our faith. I tell you that story not because it puts me in the best of light, but I'll tell you this story because actually when we start stepping into this invitational life living, we are always going to bump into people who want to know more about our story, who want to know something about us, the faith we have, and how that plays out in our lives. Last weekend, there was another story when my youngest daughter, we went to visit some friends, and my youngest daughter was with one of her friends, and they disappeared for a few hours, and we kind of wanted to know what are they up to. And so we went upstairs and found them on the computer, and they were printing invitations to go out into town to invite people to church. I mean, like, how awkward was that? And they were desperate to do it. They wanted to go into the town and meet anybody and everybody to invite them to church. I was super uncomfortable at even the thought of doing something like that. The next day we went out for some lunch with some friends, and my daughter and her friend had come to lunch, and they came with all these invitations, and they persisted again. They wanted to go around the whole restaurant and give out these invitations to every person who was in that place. My wife's really good at this stuff, and she was able to talk to them and say, why don't we pray and ask God for 2 tables that we can go and give these invitations to. These are opportunities, moments when we can be filled with all sorts of fear. In fact, that's the journey of this invitational life. How do we move from a place of fear? Fear that kind of disarms us and disables us. And, fear can be worrying about what others think, fear about rejecting you and what you share and your faith. And we need to move from fear to courage. But how do we do that? Well, this invitational life is all about that journey from fear to life. Those moments, those examples, they can be really small, and you can have your own examples, but actually they are moments when I was a little bit fearful of what others might thought, fearful of others overhearing the conversation on the train. But actually for my life, I want to be somebody who grows in courage. And this invitational life is all about us stepping out in courage. But how do we do that? There's a story in Joshua chapter 4 when the people of God are standing one side of the Jordan River, but they want to get to the other side. Now, the Jordan River was not some tame river. It was fast, it was flowing, it was ferocious, it was dangerous. But they knew they had to get to the other side of the river because the other side was the promised land, the place that God had promised them. So they inquired of God, and God instructed them and said, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get the priests, and they're to load the ark of God, the ark of the covenant of God, onto their shoulders, and they're to step into the river. And when they do, I'm going to block up the river so that all of the people can cross. That's exactly what happened. It was an amazing miracle. You can read it for yourself in Joshua chapter 4. When they get to the other side, God says to Joshua, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back into the river, and I want you to get some stones. And I want you to build a memorial in order that you and all the generations that follow will remember this miracle and remember what happened. It's amazing. You can see those stones, and people for generations would have passed those stones, and they would have asked the question, what happened here? What took place in this location? And for many, many years, they'd have been able to tell the story of the miracle that God did for the people of Israel. Fast forward in history, and you get to the letter that Peter writes to Christians and to people like you and me, and he uses that analogy, that concept of stones. But here's what he says. He says, you and me, we are living stones. We're living stones. What was Peter getting at? He's ultimately saying each and every single one of us, we've got a story to tell. We've got a story to tell of the miracle that God's done in your life. You're not a dead stone that the people of Israel and that can walk past and say, what happened here? You're a living stone. That means wherever you go, people should be asking the question, what happened here? What took place in your life? That actually the way that we live, and when we show up into places and spaces, just by being there, people are able to see God in you. By the way you love, by your grace, by the joy that constantly emanates from your life. And you rock up into that place with all the joy and all grace and all your love. And people are like, what happened here? What took place here in your life? You see, the thing that we kind of need to keep on learning, that we learned a long time ago, is that God is everywhere. He's not just in a church building, but he's outside of the church building. He's in your car. He's in the coffee shop you regularly visit. He's in the gym that you sometimes never maybe go to. He's kind of everywhere. He's wherever you set foot, God is already there. And actually the greatest mission and the greatest revelation that we can ever get on board with God on is when we figure out where God is and we go and join him there. We go and partner with him where he's already working. We need to figure out for us in this invitational life, what does it look like to involve ourselves in the stories of other people? When we show up into their lives, when we ask the waiter or the waitress, hey, how are you doing? What's your story? What's happening with you? When we step out and take a risk, and actually I reckon that right now there are people in your world that are waiting for you to take a risk on them. What does that look like for you? Well, as we journey through this invitational life, we're going to discover more of this stuff together. But actually, we need to be a people who are just willing to show up where God's already working and join him in that place as we seek to live out the invitational life.